Hello Internet, I'm the Disney Brain and welcome to the DCOM review. Before Civilized returns with a DCOM themed debate, let's talk about a recent under the radar film. I say that because 2015 was an important year for DCOMs, what with Teen Beach returning, another brilliantly subtle Paul Hohen film, and the franchise in the making. And yet, one of the films you guys have requested the most has been this one. So, without any further ado, let's take our signature closer look as we dive into Bad Hair Day. We start things off with a pretty typical DCOM introduction to one of our main characters, in Monica, played by Laura Marano, who I assume most of you all have seen before. Monica is a high school tech whiz, obsessed with the opinions of everyone else, a character trait that will have obvious implications moving forward. But everything about the first 8 or so minutes is just fairly standard window dressing because this film doesn't really get started until Leigh-Allyn Baker hits the scene, portraying a disgraced cop in Liz. And Liz doesn't just steal the show, no, she is the show. Leigh-Allyn brings life to every single line she's given in this one. So, her whole reason for being here is tracking down some lost jewels, the same jewels that Monica happens to have in her possession. So, she strikes up a deal with Liz in order to accomplish everything on her to-do list. And no prizes for guessing that their road trip will inevitably take all manner of figurative and literal turns en route to the conclusion. What we have here is Disney Channel's closest thing to a buddy cop movie, except with an inherently more clever premise as to how the two people present diverge. The rest of the plot is mainly comedic in nature, primarily there to get laughs out of the viewers as well as better establish the perspectives of Liz and Monica as two people from two different generations, and all of these scenes are hilarious. I'd rather not go into too much detail regarding these scenes though, because explaining why it's funny that Monica doesn't know who Marlon Brando is kind of makes the joke a little less funny. But I think that to this point, the funniest thing about this movie is the intentionality and the mindset behind the humor. The minds behind Bad Hair Day know that there will be far more people watching this movie that can relate to Monica as directly opposed to Liz, and also probably more Laura Marano fans just in general tuning into her DCOM debut. But they do a great job at making her plight look silly, which it most definitely is, and makes great use of Leigh-Allyn's put-upon attitude towards the things Monica finds important. That's a pretty bold move, because until everything resolves, this film can never be accused of pandering to the audience majority, but also learning how to absolve yourself of such petty attachments is one of the bigger points the film is trying to make. It's not just outwardly mocking prom-obsessed high school girls, there's a legitimate reason for it too. Getting back to the plot, we get our villain for the evening, Pierce, who is, of course, British because movie villain, and moves like a spy because he's probably another classic film nod, in this case, Pierce Brosnan, who some of you might know as 90s James Bond. But he's less of a character and more like a hurdle for Liz to clear, so what you see is pretty much what you get. Then, as a result of all the mall shenanigans, Liz gets herself arrested and gets sent to where else but her old stomping grounds. Afterwards, Monica demands the truth from Liz, and for the first time in the film so far, we get a break from the frivolity and switch to a more serious tone. The backstory itself is kind of wonky, since how did Liz ever expect to catch Pierce on foot, and the traveling jewels bit seems even more absurd, because if Liz was always able to track the jewels, it seems a little strange that only now would they stay in one place for long enough for her to make her move. But Leigh-Allyn Baker's always great delivery more than makes up for the less logical bits. Plus, I fully believe the character she's portraying, so I understand not only why she would screw up, but why she'd be so determined to right her wrong. We also get a heavy moment from Monica, where she addresses her mother leaving, and I am glad this movie had enough restraint to not even sniff at the idea of some Star Wars but gender-swapped reveal, or the even more tedious trope of character that acts motherly ends up with a single dad. Going either route would have taken so much away from this film. So now, the tone returns to the comedic and we get car chases and Pierce still on the loose. Then, Liz's car gets taken to an impound lot, which also causes a rift to grow between the leads. But now, Pierce has taken Monica's dad as a hostage and wants the jewels in exchange for his safety, which leads to one of the smartest pair of scenes I've seen from any DCOM. Not necessarily because it breaks new ground on thermodynamics or something like that, but because of what they do with the teleplay here. When Liz has to flirt with Impound Guy to allow Monica to do her computer thing, she mouths one of her plate numbers to Monica to get her car cleared. But he doesn't know that, which forces him to re-enter the plate number after Monica already located the car on the system and made the necessary adjustments. It's smart details like this which allow me to overlook the fact that nobody else in the waiting area thought Monica's actions were at all suspicious. The next scene isn't as smart, but again, I appreciate the attention to detail, or in this case, the lack of attention. Allow me to explain. When they get the car back, the jewels are missing. We soon realize that her makeup kit, where she was keeping the jewels, was switched out with Sierra's from back in the mall scene. What I like about this setup is that they never actually show that switch happening. We know it did now, but the camera never overtly focuses on it, which means it doesn't have to be built up as contrived dramatic irony for the viewers, and instead as a legitimate surprise for us and the characters. Both very tiny details that make this film way better as far as I'm concerned. So, then the pair confronts Pierce, but they stop him this time because Liz called for backup. And then, we get a hilarious scene with Monica using her people-finding app to locate her dad, essentially eliminating Pierce's only leverage. My only issue is they could have zapped this guy without risking the jewels, since he isn't armed, and then freed Father Dearest with backup on the way, because if he was a smarter villain, he could have easily evaded capture here too. But this film is fairly self-aware regarding how absurd Pierce is as a villain. Heck, he's so British, he uses Monica's iPad to watch European football. So making him smarter, interestingly enough, might have actually been a poor fit into this particular movie. But to be perfectly clear, Thanos still has absolutely no excuse on that end. So, the film ends on a high note for everyone. I would have preferred this film take a page from the Wendy Wu playbook and not feel the need to prom it up as a resolution. And, since this movie is also partly about learning from a divergent perspective, it could have played out that way and worked just fine. But, on the other hand, it's also more about overcoming the fear of acceptance by peers, which gives this resolution more in common with Radio Rebel, so it also works. And, where would we be without the most definitive DCOM trope of them all? Because, as we know, say it with me now, every DCOM has its stance, but what's not a common trope is two radically different people changing each other without having to settle into some sort of advanced relationship status afterwards. And now, the characters. Not really too much to say about the supporting bunch here. They're mostly just there to react or interact with the lead pair on their hilarious misadventures. Although, I did find the police chief a strange character. Not because her yelling gave me horrifying Miss Trunchbull flashbacks, but because she's supposed to be Liz's mother, yet doesn't look anywhere near old enough to be. I can't locate any good information on Susan Algreen who plays the chief, so she might very well be a young-looking 60-year-old. But it did take me out of the film a bit trying to legitimize that information. I think the dad's limited involvement was necessary though, because I think his idea of Monica being perfect as Monica herself describes it falls in line with being a single father trying to shield his daughter from the guilt she still partially feels about their mother leaving them. And that, of course, feeds into her need for approval through other people, and there's your character. Speaking of which, Laura Marano as Monica is pretty good here. She probably could have been even better if her co-star wasn't carrying this film acting-wise, but that's nothing against her, of course. Her only real job here was to play a teenager believably obsessed with acceptance, technology, and fashion, and I think she pretty much does that here. If you liked her or loved her as Allie, where I think she does a little better overall, then you'll probably enjoy her here too. And I liked how they used several of her traits as a punching bag for most of the early jokes, because for one thing, it's funny, and more importantly, it allows her to accept perspectives in a more constructive way, and not just in a vote on my dress sort of way. She doesn't change everything about her, and she still probably doesn't know who Marlon Brando is, but that's way more realistic than a top to bottom overhaul, which way too many movies think is just the funniest thing ever, when it isn't. But let's not parse words here. This is Leigh-Allyn Baker's movie first and foremost, and almost everything that's good or even great about this film stems directly from her comedic style and the expert level handling of whatever the writers, storyboarders, and director told her to do. And it's more than just her humor, because Liz as a character is given a mostly solid backstory which allows Leigh-Allyn to dominate the screen even when the tone needs to shift to serious. But do you really need me to tell you that Leigh-Allyn Baker is the single greatest aspect of another Disney Channel project? At this point, she's a little used to that title. Her character arc and resolution is a little overly straightforward, but that makes sense because she was in her early 40s when this film was being made, and people that age don't really change too much. But even still, Leigh-Allyn Baker puts in an all-time great leading actress performance and almost single-handedly makes this film one of the funniest DCOMs ever made. Saying anything more wouldn't really help too much because everything is pretty self-explanatory once you see her in action. And that's Bad Hair Day. So, what's the verdict? Bad Hair Day is a really good movie that has heart and substance to it, but never loses track of being a hilarious buddy cop movie at its core. And while Leigh-Allyn Baker proves to be the lifeblood of this film, Laura Marano does go through an important arc regarding self-acceptance that essentially accomplishes a diet version of what Debbie Ryan went through as Tara. But I think there's something to be said for a DCOM that can prioritize humor and then throw in a character arc for kicks, since most DCOMs attempt to do just the opposite. Because even though Geek Charming, for example, works in large part because Sarah Hyland's character went through a dramatic change, that doesn't mean every DCOM needs their lead female to go through an equally dramatic change. Sometimes, movies just want to be a literal fun ride, and that's what we get here. There's not too much underneath this film because the dialogue pretty much explains everything. That, more than anything, keeps this film from ascending towards true greatness. As an example, Adventures in Babysitting was never ever going to be as transcendent or as artistic as something like True Confessions, even if it was indisputably the perfect version of itself, which it wasn't. If you set the bar lower, relatively speaking, then clearing it may still be impressive, but it's never going to be as impressive as setting the bar sky high and then clearing it anyways. The difference being that Bad Hair Day, as directly opposed to that forgettable babysitting movie, effectively works with the elements it has to become a very good film. But that presents me with a bit of an impasse, because for as good as this film is, the reasons why aren't ones I need to or should deeply explain, and doing so here with this specific film might actually hurt your overall enjoyment if you haven't seen it yet. There are a few jokes in there that may fly over your head if you just don't know some of the things Liz is referencing. But, again, I think her delivery here makes even the less recognizable old school shoutouts easy to laugh at. Everything else you need to know about this movie is either very explicitly explained or shown in the movie itself. But I think DCOMs like these are important for the same reason movies like Deadpool are important on the big screen. In both cases, the general idea of what makes a movie follow either the principles of a DCOM or a superhero film are being purposefully challenged and changed. But more importantly, it wasn't changed for change's sake. No, that's stupid. Bad Hair Day made the changes work through great casting and great jokes, and forever changed what a quality DCOM could look like, because the best part about Bad Hair Day is that until the closing minutes, it doesn't want to be like other DCOMs. In fact, it actively makes fun of several DCOM standards. It was never going to be an awe-inspiring film, but the minds behind it knew that, and that mentality allowed it to succeed on its own terms, which makes it an easy recommendation from me, because as I always say, the only way to know how funny it is for sure is to give it a watch and decide for yourself. And of course, thanks for watching.
Large nostrils? That's what you got?
He has really large nostrils.
You don't necessarily have to point that out.
What am I supposed to do? Lie? Say he has small nostrils?
Oh, my goodness.